Let's get started here. Morning, Chris. Glad to see you with us today.
Morning, Ernest.
Morning,
Hey,
Ernest.
it's been a
Welcome.
while.
And
It
yeah,
has been.
yes, you got a interesting group. Okay, and join us. I guess I should start it. Okay, let's start the Zoom meeting. So now we're officially started, for whatever that's worth. And we've got a good group with us today. Dave and Thomas and Ernest and Chris. Ernest, your mic is not on, but
Yes, sir. It's on now.
okay. But we may be getting a couple more people in the process. Um, our first, Tom Deneen is going to join us here. And for those of you who are concerned, we are recording today. Had a couple painful lessons. Morning, Tom.
Morning, George, and everyone else.
And but anyway, our first topic is all black belts are not created equal, which would open up a real can of worms. And our kind of questions here, if you downloaded the Zoom topics, which were copied them, which was all the invitation, what does a black belt mean? And then you have the issue of adult black belts versus kiddie black belts. Varied promotional criteria, even within one martial art. And you also have to look beyond the physical criteria, and then there's time and grade criteria. And these two elements come into particular play as a person moves up in rank and also up in age. So I guess we're going to start with, anybody want to tackle the question, what does a black belt mean? Generally?
In one word, intermediate.
There you go.
Okay. What do you mean by intermediate?
Before I got any training, I heard the term black belt and heard stories and all the mystique and black belt just to the general public has this aura of expert and professional grade. And come to find out, after earning my first black belt, I was hit with the in the face with good congratulations. Now you're an intermediate martial artist, and you're an intermediate practitioner of self-defense, and you have a long road ahead if you really want to get good. And at that time, I also learned that the word expert, which gets overused, applies to 6th degree and above. Now, that's just the word that came to me on the street and in the dojo. So I'm willing to stand corrected by anyone here. That's what I've been operating under, and I've verified it with several sources. So there we are.
Any other thoughts on what a
I would,
go
I
ahead.
would, I'd concur with Dave, and definitely, and expand from the AJA perspective. Talking to Dave and others on the board, especially Tyler Gardner, vice president, the idea of black belt, because the AJA embraces a lot of different styles of jujitsu. Something like competence in the basics of jujitsu would be a really broad definition for us and for, I think, any reputable martial arts organization. But that definition is so potentially broad and vague that it's difficult to work with sometimes. When that's the kind of practical definition of it. The external sort of layman's definition of black belt is sort of what Dave was getting into, where there's a perception among some that it indicates mastery. He is a martial arts master because he has a black belt, which is totally unfounded. And thinking about it, the best analogy I came up with was something like an academic degree, like a bachelor's degree. And in the United States, I just checked, there are about 3,500 institutions that grant bachelor's degrees. But the difference between a bachelor's degree from, say, Harvard College, which is, I forget the acceptance right now, but something like 2 or 3% just to get into Harvard College, and then you go through the process of getting a bachelor's degree, is extraordinarily high, difficult to get into, and a narrow range of people. But on the other hand, you can also be a Bachelor of Arts if you graduate from any community college in the United States with minimal or no admission requirements. So to say that you're a Bachelor of Arts is radically different depending on what the experience is, what the background is. And I think the same applies to the term black belt, because you can get a black belt online, you can get it within a year or two if you're a teenager in some places. On the other hand, it can take 8 years or more if you're a committed BJJ practitioner. In my case, it took me 8 or 9 years to get to Shodan in Budoshin, because I took the breaks and I only went once a week. So it's all extremely contextual from the outside world perspective. And so the ultimate question is, if you call yourself a black belt, you have to be prepared to explain what it took to get there. And when you're assessing somebody in the role of the AJA, you have to say, well, you're a black belt, so tell me the story behind that black belt. And if it adds up to competence in the basics, then that's basically acceptable.
Yeah. When you move from the concept of intermediate martial artist, which is the reality, to the public's perception, which is expert, I'm drawn to remember my two favorite definitions of an expert. The first one is someone who lives more than 50 miles away. And the other definition of expert is X is a has-been and spurt is a drip under pressure.
I hope you have that written down somewhere, because that's
Well, I don't have it written down, but it's one of those things where it's a word that gets overused, and I kind of have I get dismayed when I hear it used, because my first inclination is to say, expert in what? Prove it. And I'm not a chip on my shoulder kind of prove everything to me kind of a guy. But that word brings out my detectors and spreads them far and wide.
Yeah, as Ernest Hemingway said, you're bullshit detectors for bad use of language or something.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm a little skeptical of anyone who touts himself as an expert. I mean, I guess in some contexts it could make sense, but it seems more overused as a promotional word and invites questioning, as you're saying.
Yes.
Hey, just to take it a little bit different direction, I agree. Black belt's intermediate, or at least Shodan is intermediate. Congratulations, you've graduated high school. Now you're in college. But you could teach. You can open a dojo in most rules once you attain the rank of black belt. And that makes it a little bit significant. But I guess when you start teaching, you start learning more. You start learning what you don't know. You have to prepare lesson plans and perfect your technique so you can demonstrate the technique properly to students. So that's what black belt means to me. But
Ernest, I agree with you completely. I agree with you completely. Teaching is intensified learning.
Yes. you how you say, I learned a long time ago, you don't really start learning until you have to teach something else, teach someone else what you think you know, and then you find all your mistakes. It's a process. I kind of look at Shodan as, you've got your, let me put what Seki said to it. When I got my black belt, Seki said, okay, Joji, now you're ready to learn the art. I think a black belt has the basics down. I mean, that's why we have all the belt tests below that. And, because we're trying to assure that there's a consistency in basic skill acquisition, for lack of a better phrase. But I would say, yeah, Seki's approach, and I tell that to my new black belt. Say, okay, now you're ready to start learning the art, and learning the art in any martial art is beyond knowing basic techniques. And that's, that to me is a difference. And if the person is then willing to continue on in their quote unquote studies of their art, they will at some point learn the art. And I think what happens, and I can only speak for jujitsu, but uh, and I don't like to use the word holistic, but you eventually develop a very holistic approach to the art, because you start seeing all the connections between techniques and moves, and what can be done more efficiently. Um, I just got a question today: is Budoshin Jujitsu like small circle jujitsu? And which is a legitimate question. And the person also asked, "Did I ever work with Wally J?" Which is yes. And we learned from each other. But one thing I learned, I was able to learn from probably watching Wally J and how he was teaching, was his techniques are. I mean, the techniques are basically the same, regardless of route. But he was doing them in a much smaller circle, which is where you get small circle jujitsu. And Seki, when he taught, he would use big motions, wide motions. And I got the perspective then that maybe he did it this way because it was easier to show students how to do a technique with big movements. But then as I got to know Seki better and the art better, I saw that he would bring these movements down into smaller movements. So, at some point, for example, the hand throw is no longer this big arc, but it's more of it's almost against your chest or in front of you, and you're just holding everything in place and moving your body, and that's what does the technique, and it's the same technique. And that to me is learning the art versus learning the technique, because the art applies to the execution of many techniques, different techniques. And once you move to that level, your execution of techniques improves. And you're also doing them smoother, and you're doing them faster, and all this other stuff. So yeah, I'd kind of go with Dave saying, yeah, it's intermediate. You've got the basics down now.
I'll just throw in that this is the description you just offered, George, is um, baked in to the Japanese conception of these ranks more so than in most American adaptations of them. And the example I have is from Japanese swordsmanship, which I did in an organization that's entirely based in Japan and had mostly Japanese instructors. And the comment of a very high-ranking instructor during some huge seminar was, American students of our art tend to be the same level as our Japanese students up until about Shodan and the lower ranks and ranks below that. But as we advance, Americans don't have they're not as good to, and this is a Japanese guy being blunt. And I think that's because in that art, at least in its Japanese manifestation, Shodan is not seen as a huge deal. It's a significant step, but the real learning, the real refinement and advancement starts happening in subsequent ranks. So Shodan is not nearly the huge deal it is in most American arts. And I feel, because the term black belt has gotten the unfortunate reputation as being an expert, it's been exaggerated as to being more than it really ought to be in America. We sort of see it as a culmination, that it is very comprehensive in most arts, and that once you've made it there, there's a lot of other refinement that goes on. But Shodan is the big deal, but it's not in Japan. And I wonder if that's how that's happened in America, because it's black belt has gained so much significance as a term that maybe our arts have evolved that way. Like, oh, it's Shodan, it's a big deal. We better make it a big deal internally so that it meets the public perception of that.
The truth is that once you've achieved black belt, yes, you're intermediate. However, if you've achieved a legitimate black belt, you also have experienced Mushin enough times that if you are attacked, you're not going to stand there and take it. You're either going to run faster than your aggressor, or you're going to go into techniques that will be much more effective than if you didn't ever have any training. And those techniques will come about with less and less conscious thought, depending on how often you've experienced Mushin along the way. So you are a harder target as a black belt, even though you're, quote, just an intermediate. In the not just the eyes, but in reality, you can come across as someone whose success is more likely to be able to successfully defend yourself. You've improved the odds. You've jacked your percentage of self-defense awareness considerably higher than without any training at all.
Dave, wouldn't you say that's the thing? Wouldn't you say that's the same thing at Sankyu or any rank? It's a continuum.
Okay, it is a
More
continuum.
training, you get better at doing all the things that you just said.
Absolutely. And I would say the Dan grades are a great place to continue learning efficiency. Small circle jujitsu is just a very efficient version of what Seki was doing with large circles. You grow more efficient. Sometimes you can put something, you can put someone on the ground right in front of you, and those watching don't even know what you did, because what you did is such a nuanced movement. And they're laying on the ground in front of you, exclaiming because they're in pain, and you're sitting there smiling like you don't know how you got there. I know how you got there, and anybody watching really can't say, "Well, I watched them do this." It's getting back to what I was originally saying, though. Dan grades is a great place to hone nuances, and nuances make a huge difference in the effectiveness of a technique. And if you work with techniques enough and you work with them often, your students will teach you nuances as you're teaching them the art. You'll discover more and more. So the Dan grades are where you can hone your efficiency, and you can discover more and more and use more and more nuances to make those techniques ever more effective. That's my experience.
You know, I've found that, you know, as a teacher, and I worked in a really rough school my first 23 years, and other teachers and administrators would ask me on occasion, why haven't you ever gotten in trouble for using some of the techniques you've used? And my reply has always been, I don't leave any marks. Yeah, it's kind of hard to complain when you can't see any marks. And I mean, that was one of the niceties of what Seki taught, you know, and nerve techniques and pressure points were his baby, so to speak. And none of them were hits. That's what, you know, that's what made it even more amazing is, you know, and as Dave, as you said, and Thomas, you know, you can create a lot of pain with very subtle moves if you know what you are doing, and pain and injury are two different things. Anyway,
Sensei, if I can
sure.
jump in real quick on just to add to it, you know, I think it's important to look at things in its context, you know, when asking questions like that. And that's probably why those questions exist to this day, is what does a black belt mean? I think it was probably a lot more obvious, you know, 40, 50 years ago. So the context is really this. I think if somebody's part of an organization, if you were to ask the organization what a black belt means, you're probably going to get an answer, you know, something like, well, they met these kinds of standards, you know, that the organization has set. just like any type of degree, from a university or high school or whatever. I think if you were to ask the sensei, you might get a slightly different answer because senseis tend to be more hands-on and involved in the students' lives. So yes, the standards are going to be there, but I think it's going to go a little bit deeper than that, from the sensei's perspective of what it means in their dojo specifically. And then you have the individual that actually got the black belt, and that could mean very different things to different people. That person that got their black belt is probably 1 out of 20 or 30 or more that even made it that far. They probably started with a whole bunch of people that didn't make it past orange belt, green belt, or whatever. They may have had personal challenges in their life, and it's like a major accomplishment. So it could be very, very different depending on who you ask, within its context. And then you have the cultural aspect, of it. A lot of these things do come from the Japanese culture. And if we look at Q versus Dan, the Q ranks kind of count down, right? You start with 9 or 10 or whatever, you kind of count down to 1 and 0, and 0 becomes your showdown. And, so in that culture, at least, to my understanding and in my dealings with that culture, is you're kind of a understudy. You're not necessarily an official representative student. You're an understudy. That's why you count down. And then once you become a Dan, then you're considered an official student that represents the dojo, at that level. And then you work your way up from there. So the context, I think, is important. And, once you go outside of, Japan and you're not really following any set of standards necessarily. It's just going to mean different things to different people. But at the very least, regardless of where you got it from, hopefully there's some minimum level of standards that you've met, and the person didn't just make up ranks or, what have you. But anyway, that's my experience and my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, and touches on the internal aspect of what it's like to become a black belt in any number of dojos. And I've been in dojos where the expectations have been very transparent, where you're given a list of dozens of techniques and maybe ethical expectations, and the sensei will be open and say, here's everything that's in the black belt curriculum. You're expected to be competent in all of these, and you'll be tested in this manner on all these techniques and ethical qualities, if that's part of it, when the time comes to do that. I've been in other dojos where there's nothing like that, where there are say George's books on intermediate and basic jujitsu, and you work with them, and it's sort of occasionally citing those books, and there's no clear path to Shodan. So I would argue in favor of transparency for the student who's experiencing the path to Shodan, and lay out expectations. That's not to say that they should know exactly when they're going to be tested, because that's up to the sensei and the subjective decision making and the field the sensei has for how well someone's has mastered these techniques. But the other side, the traditional side, which I think George has brought up as an experience he had with Seki, is it's sort of entirely up to the sensei and how the sensei feels about observing you for years and years and years. But there's a lack of clarity that I see in some dojos, and I think is probably worth trying to avoid or improve upon.
Yeah, and it probably a lot of that comes from because for a long time in the old days, senseis that taught didn't teach a large number of students. Maybe they had a handful of students, maybe 10, their entire teaching career. And that's why those people became very good, but that's also why it was more personalized based on the teacher's experience and the student's experience with each other. But I think when organizations started forming, now you have to deal with it more like an academic setting. You have to start setting standards and stuff in order for it to really mean anything. How do you ensure quality control? So that's the shift I think we've experienced in the past several decades. And that's why we still find that. You go to a little individual place, it's going to vary. You know, if you're part of a bigger organization, you may have something a little bit more standard.
Exactly. Happens with any organization that grows. Has to be some kind of institutionalization, as kind of ugly and remote as that term sounds. But if you're going to expand something and try to have standards, there has to be something coherent written down, and people agreeing to abide by that on some level.
Right. Okay, let's move on slightly here and deal with the issue of kiddie black belts versus adult black belts. For those of you who teach kids, and kids, I'm usually referring someone who's under 12 or 13. Do you have different promotional criteria for kids than you do adults? Belt rank requirements?
No.
Not here. Same.
I mean, and I guess the question is, along with kiddie versus adult black belts, it is, I don't know if you can even ask the question, is a kiddie black belt a legitimate black belt from the perspective of the dojo? Or what does it, I mean, I don't like to use the word kiddie. Because I won't,
George, what
I won't promote a person to black belt until they're age 16. That's just it for me. That's it. And there are some other things to go along with that, but are, or junior black belts, or whatever you want to call it, are they legit? And I don't even know if the word they're legitimate is a correct question. Maybe what is the value of it?
Well,
I
the
think
value
I
is
can-
just to keep the student coming to class. That's all. That's all it is. Because when you're teaching kids at that point, it's as much marketing as anything else. You got to keep the parents bringing the kid over to the class.
Briston, just speak up. Don't raise your hand. This is your mic is off. Your audio's off, Briston.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can y'all hear me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're fine now.
Okay. I'm purple belt in Budoshin, but I hold black belts and other forms of jujitsu. And I'd like to weigh in on this. And on the Gracie side of things, you're not allowed to be a black belt until you're 18, and you don't transition into the adult ranks until you're 16. So my son is an orange belt, and he is highly capable. He's 15. He's about to be 16 at the end of the year, and he's tapping out my brown belts and my purple belts that are adults. So I think it's subjective to the individual. I think he's highly capable as a kid, but that's just how the organization has set their standards, And I mean, what do you do? Like, I think in the West, we've got this perception that a black belt is a master, which is why on the Gracie side of things, it takes like a decade to get your black belt. Whereas in the East, from what I know, a black belt's just an advanced student, and you're not really considered any kind of instructor until Sandan. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, I felt the weight of being an instructor when I was Shodan, but I have an excuse. I was Shodan for 7 years before I was Nidan. So I'd been teaching a little while before I even got to Nidan, let alone Sandan. I'm not saying I was a better teacher for shirking rank advancement. I was a selfish teacher. Part of what took me to Shodan was my goal from the time I was a white belt was to teach. And Shodan got me to the level where I was allowed to teach. So here we go.
Okay. Well, yeah, and Seki's attitude was if you're Shodan, you can teach. Okay, it doesn't mean you can be a great teacher, but you can teach. Okay. But this leads us to the question is, because a couple of you have brought it up already, should there be a minimum age for Shodan?
Well, you have to again, this is part of the context, right? So as most of you probably know, we work with a lot of kids. Probably half or more of our students are kids. So I've always treated it as kind of like a school system. You have kindergarten, you have grade school, high school, college, and so forth. So we do actually give out quote unquote Shodan ranks, for kids, but they're junior ranks. Really, all their ranks are junior ranks. So what does that mean is basically it. The reason I've always given it out is because they need to mark their achievement. If somebody, that's kind of the goal, right? Everybody knows what a black belt is, and you don't want them to necessarily go through everything and now they're 12 and they have to wait another 5-6 years before they can get a black belt. What do they do between that time, right? So for me, I do have I don't want to say different requirements. The requirements are the same. So for example, pick any techniques, right? They're required to do those same techniques. However, the level of execution and how smooth it is and stuff, and I know some of it is subjective, but I don't expect them to be able to do it the same way as an adult, black belt, that's testing for black belt. So they still have to do what the curriculum, but the expectation is different. It's more appropriate for their age group. And yes, there's some subjectivity, but you do it long enough, you can develop a little bit of a standard around it. And then once they have a couple of choices after that. So if they're 13 or whatever, they got their junior black belt, which is what we call them. They transition into our teen and adult program. And at that rank, the cross rank into an adult rank is about a orange belt. So the first test they take as an adult, or at least in the adult class, is their orange belt test. And then they go through that cycle again. So by the time they hit 18, in our case, it's not 18, it's 16 for an adult black belt. But by the time they hit 16, they're ready now for an adult black belt. And then they transition into that. So there's a distinction. The requirements on paper are the same, but the expectation is different. And they don't get a full black belt until they're 16. And to us, it's been a win-win situation. It gives them a path forward, keeps them engaged, and it manages the expectations correctly.
Yeah, I would add that this is the question of questions, and one of the issues that distinguishes martial arts training, traditional martial arts training, from things like sports, because I've seen teenagers who have great natural talent in some sports, with very little history. They're just very talented and the only sport I played in school was tennis. So I'll use tennis as an example. If they pick up tennis very quickly and they want to join a school team, there's no reason to prevent them from joining that team and having the rank of a varsity team member if they have the same or better skills than other players who've been playing their entire lives. But the distinction with martial arts is I believe there's something else that goes along with status of black belt or some level of measurement like black belt. That's something in addition to just the physical ability to execute techniques. There's the time spent absorbing the atmosphere in your dojo and understanding what ethical qualities go along with being a black belt. And there's also the ability to teach or convey techniques to other people. I would say teaching should be part of what it means to be any level of black belt. So that's one distinction. The other one comes with some of what Briston was saying earlier with BJJ advancement. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the ability to have to tap out other BJJ people is critical. That's, if not, it's, I don't know if it's the only criterion for advancement, but it's a major one. It's a very
No,
yeah.
yes, sir. And it depends on where you go. The atmosphere and standards vary just as much on that side of things. You know. But yeah, the competency on the mat is a big thing. And what I really dislike is the current trend, where you mentioned ethics, you know, and that's disappearing. And my beloved tradition that I've been doing for 24 years now is being relegated to the world of sport because it is being seen as simply a physical endeavor. And the self-defense applications of the art are disappearing. And that's one of the main.
Amen. Yes.
Yeah, and that's one of the I think Elio and any of his sons, you know, would be very disappointed in today's current trend. And many of them spoken out about it. So I am drawn to the traditional side of jiu-jitsu quite a bit. I think we're missing something, you know, and I would like to get back to a tradition that incorporates ethics as part of the training, you know, personal development.
If you look at top competitors in something like MMA, Conor McGregor comes to mind as a really entertaining but just guy lacking in many positive ethical qualities, I guess. And
yeah, he's a fighter. He's not a martial artist. He's a fighter, and I think attitude determines what, you know, the difference. George St. Pierre, I believe he's a martial artist. They're both MMA champions. What's the difference?
Well, yeah, that speaks to the distinction between sports, what it means to be a great athlete, period, versus being a member of, in my case, the American Jiu-Jitsu Association, which has ethical standards built in, so that if you get arrested and you've beaten up people and you've assaulted people and you've raped women, in the case of Mike Tyson as an example of a great fighter, those are all things that are going to exclude you from the membership in the American Jiu-Jitsu Association, because they would be seen as conduct unbecoming a martial artist. But the sporting world, that's almost an incentive to go see these people because they're seen as outlaws and just interesting because they're personally so screwed up, and yet they're great fighters. That's a key distinction between being a great athlete, period, despite all your horrible personal qualities, versus being a martial artist who is part of a world that perpetuates high ethical standards.
That sounds like a topic for a future Zoom call, fighter versus martial artist.
Yeah, it's if you notice the times when I'm looking down here, I've already picked up 1, 2, 3, 4 additional topics for future discussions. And this is one of them.
Sensei, just as an aside, just in 2009 at your national gathering in Santa Clarita, had the privilege of working with a young man named Antonio Ramon, and he was a purple belt at the time. And I remember thinking, wow, this guy is a jujitsu savant. He was amazing. And I really enjoyed working with him. I learned a lot from him. Later that year, he went to a competition back when you guys had competitions in the Western region. And he came within a few shaves, thousandths of a point of winning the entire tournament against a bunch of black belts. And I thought, wow, what I experienced was borne out in competition. So if we teach long enough, we will run into young people who are savants, and those people holding them back, like Chris Kadami was saying, would be criminal. This guy was just just delightfully humble and capable and naturally talented. I've never worked with anybody before or since that had his natural skill set. And he was as good as or better than some black belts I've enjoyed working with on an ongoing basis.
Yeah. The one of the unique characteristics of the AJ scoring system, and which was greatly enhanced by a couple of high school kids who came up with an Excel program that would compare scores in different divisions, and you could take tournaments in different locations and compare scores. Well, one of the factors we found out was that there were 2 or 3 times where a purple belt actually took the tournament championship based upon the scores earned as his scores as compared to higher belt scores. There's some other factors involved there, but there was never a guarantee that a black belt would be the tournament champion. And that did upset some black belts because they felt it wasn't, for lack of a better word, fair, that a purple belt should take the tournament championship when they were higher ranked. But those are the realities. You do have lower ranks that physically are phenomenal. And the other issue which we're kind of discussing here is, well, they're physically phenomenal. How about their mental and philosophical attitude? Is it up to par to be a black belt? That's where it gets to be subjective. And that's another topic I've noted down for the future is, what are, because I think all of us have said, well, promotion to black belt is somewhat subjective. Well, if everybody's being subjective, do we each have any particular criteria for this quote unquote subjective decision? And what are they? And we may find out, and that, like I said, it's going to be for future topic unless we want to hit it here, which we can do, is are there any commonalities in the subjective criteria we have, which maybe then makes them not subjective? Am I confusing everyone?
I think mastery of the basics or understanding and effective application of basic techniques, something most people can agree on as the essential criterion for Shodan. I've never heard of a martial art that doesn't have that expectation, and that can take a varying amount of time. In most arts I've experienced, it's taken several years to get them to the level where they're intermediate competence, but that's the general understanding. So yeah. And I wanted to welcome Sensei Eric Tollett.
Yes.
Joined us. I invited him in the course of this discussion because he and I have had long discussions about the meaning of black belts and ranks in martial arts. And so I'm glad he could join us.
Glad to be here, guys.
Okay. So do we want to launch into that topic today, or do we want to we didn't even get to the answer to the question, should there be a minimum age even for Shodan?
I think so.
Chris nailed it, though. Chris really, he changed my mind. I like Budoshin Jujitsu because you did have to be 16 to be a black belt. I don't believe in 10-year-old black belts, but Chris changed my mind on junior ranks. Maybe there is such a thing as a 10-year-old junior black belt. Somebody that's particularly gifted.
Yeah, I was going
but
to say that's kind of what Sensei Torres has been doing for a long time. Is he has a junior black belt club. You know, when you reach 16, you're basically the highest rank of brown belt that you can be. And then when you're old enough, you know, or mature enough, then you're kind of like retested for your Shodan to prove that you have the maturity level to be a Shodan.
Yeah, and for us too, you know, just to add further clarity, we don't even give them the same type of belt. All of our
Right.
junior ranks, even the Q ranks, the junior black belts, have a white stripe going through it. So there's a clear distinction between the adult ranks and the kids ranks.
Okay.
You know, there's no mistake about it. Again, it's like having a high school diploma, you know, versus a college degree or, you know, masters of doctors. It's really the same format. And in our culture, I've always found that to have some level of consistency that way between what they're used to in our culture and the way we run things just works better as long as there's no mistake. And, you know, even with the whole fighter warrior thing, I know we said it might be a different topic, but really at a simple level, there's always been fighters throughout history. I think what we may be thinking about as warriors would be like, for example, in Japan, the ones that would follow the code of Bushido, right? Or in Europe, the code of chivalry. You know, there's a philosophy which, you know, a set of behaviors and things that go along with it, some decorum that goes along with it that really makes that distinction, you know, which is something we all, at least in this group, you know, kind of like and want, that makes the difference. Otherwise, you're just training fighters and, you know, with sports and things like that. I mean, in the more modern settings, you know, like even with some, you know, BJJ type of places, they look at it more as a gym experience, right? You kind of come and go. They don't necessarily bow, you know, those types of things. And that's okay for what they do, you know, from a sport perspective. But if we want something deeper, it's probably because it's based on that code of Bushido. That's kind of the romantic, you know, aspect of it we're drawn to. Otherwise, it's just another activity for at least this crowd. You know, and so how you run your dojo and the culture you set in the dojo with the formalities and things really goes along with that. So whether they're kids, they're adults, or anybody in between, I know since this Kirby has had opportunity to interact with my students, you'll know it's my students because no matter what rank and age they are, you know, that code of conduct goes with it, independent of the physical skill, you know, and if they're not like that, they're probably not one of mine, you know, because that's how I run the dojo, you know, for better or for worse.
Yeah,
There's a quote. I'm sorry.
yeah. Let me insert just a little story here from when I taught junior high and had jiu-jitsu. I required that the kids stop and bow into the classroom, and they had to stop and bow out of the classroom. Okay, hunky dory, nice thing to have them do, because junior high kids normally run in and out of classrooms. What happened because of this is that they started doing it in other classrooms, and other kids started adopting the practice because they want to be in. And even my kids that would just show up for some other class, they would stop, again, because this was happening. And it's slowed down because public schools are weird. They concentrate on, how do you say, we can't have kids rushing in and out of classrooms. They might get hurt. I mean, I never saw a kid that was hurt. We had like 2,400 kids. I never saw a kid that was hurt rushing in and out of a classroom. But it slowed the process down because they were trying to behave in a certain way that would indicate respect for the classroom and for the dojo, or maybe it was just to be in and do the right thing. So what we do as senseis and how we expect our students to behave in the dojo, as Chris has said, can play out in many other areas. And it's also, like the bowing, I ended up with kids in my history class bowing to me before they asked me a question. Of course, I bow back out of respect, but it's amazing how do you say, socially acceptable behavior can be, how do you call it, can grow because it's seen by others as something positive. So, Chris is doing a good job here, because if his kids are displaying a certain attitude and behavior in other places, and other kids will pick that up as well. And that's nice. It shows that you're doing a good job as a sensei. So, and I know we all do that to some extent.
Surprised.
I follow a gentleman named John Level. If you guys are familiar with the Warrior Poet Society, and it's just the warrior poet. To me, that's the mentality: is you have to have that professional, traditional, gentleman kind of like behavior, but when it's time to do what you got to do, you have the ability to do it. And that reflects from you to the students. If you're Johnny Lawrence from Cobra Kai, you know what I'm saying? In the real world, that's not going to work. You have to kind of be a little bit something more like Miyagi, but with knowing that you can do what you need to do. So I really love John's mentality of a scholar, because I think that's the way it was in Japan. The samurai were very highly educated. They were very very much poets. As a matter of fact, I believe it was part of their culture was to write a poetry every morning about something that was going in their life. So you have to have that. You can't just be all about the combat or the fight, because number one, you're not going to, especially kids, you're not going to keep it. Your students, parents are going to be like, what is this? I don't want to be a part of this. We don't, in my school, we don't really, I have a really small school now. COVID kind of hurt me a little bit, and I'm trying to recover from it. But we really don't wear uniforms anymore per se, as far as like gis. Number one, I don't have a facility to do it, and I'm also doing a lot of Filipino martial arts that's actually kind of interacting now with all the other things that I've learned. But we still salute, we still bow, we still do everything that you're supposed to do. There's yes sir, no sir. We do it in Japanese. If I'm teaching Filipino, we do it in Filipino class, but or Filipino language. But it's still that you have to. If we don't give them the value, who's is going to? This world is definitely not going to. And I think as far as instructors go, that's our job, is to make sure that our students are respectable, and to have integrity, those kind of things.
Organization.
Yeah, warriorization. That's exactly it. Warriors were not feared, in their village. They were respected,
And
because if you were feared, you were a bandit. You weren't a warrior. You know what I'm saying? You were a bandit. You were someone who would take and steal and kill. If you were a warrior, you protected your village. Number one.
This is all part of organizations like Budoshin, where George has the concepts of respect, integrity. That's part of being a member of the Budoshin organization and being a sensei. In the AJA, it's right in the Constitution that if you are part of doing things like gross disrespect, rude or profane or abusive behavior, sexual harassment, abuse of dojo members, a felony conviction, or any other conduct that's unbecoming a martial artist, then you're be subject to disciplinary actions. That's part of our organization, and a way of, it rarely happens in the years I've been involved. It's only happened a couple times, but it's there. And you can, the list I just went through of rude and profane behavior, you think of, well, what if that were applied to boxers or NFL players? And you'd imagine that most of them are often guilty of just these things that we're trying to prevent in reputable martial arts organizations.
Real quick, I'd like to share a quote that I'm very fond of from Otake Sensei from Katori Shintoryu. And he says, Bushido, without the spirit of humility, is nothing more than violence. And
Right.
I found that to be really profound. And Tolet Sensei, I know John. I served with John Lovell from 2001 to 2004 in 2nd Ranger Battalion. They're
Fantastic.
Bravo
Fantastic.
Company, 1st Platoon, 1st Squad. Yeah, I deployed with them to Afghanistan. You
I
know,
thought you looked familiar to me.
no, yeah, I know Level. We have the same exact birthday, January 1st, 1982.
Okay.
He's a good
Don's a
dude, really good
fantastic
guy.
guy. Unfortunately, I haven't had an
Yeah.
opportunity to do any training with him yet, but it's definitely on my bucket list.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah, I'll let other people talk now. It was killing me. I wanted to share that with you.
Oh, that's fantastic. Great. He's an amazing guy. He's all the way around. He's just a good guy.
You guys should connect offline here. I mean, this
Yeah.
is the real 6 degrees of separation thing.
Who do we
Yeah.
attribute this quote to? The Bushido quote that you just said?
That's Otake Sensei from Katori Shinto Ryu. He says, Bushido, without the spirit of humility, is nothing more than violence. And I just love that quote so much because I think it captures what we've lost. You know, not everybody, but what I think's missing anymore. You know.
How do you enforce that? How do you perpetuate that? The answer of some organizations is to make it explicit, to say, well, here's our constitution, and if you're a member of our organization, you have to abide by it, and if you flagrantly violate it, then you're going to be disciplined, period.
I just don't teach people that are demonstrating that kind of behavior, you know. Well, first I
Agreed.
use it as like a teaching opportunity to help, like, be a mentor and a guide. But if it's if it's beyond my skills to correct, I just won't teach them. I don't want somebody. I don't want to give them a weapon.
Yeah, and to use the pop culture thing, Cobra Kai, which I admit, having watched it, it does touch on these ethical issues where you have a skill set that can enable you to do certain things to other people, and when you're a young, confused person, it's perfectly possible that you're going to misuse those skills, and that extends into everything we do. And how do we perpetuate it? How do we make it part of everything we do, and just have it part of our systems is the question.
Yeah, that's why, I mean, as when I came up with the 3 terms, respect, integrity, humility, there is so much, how do you say, you can provide too much information and too many standards and too many criteria, and people are simply unable to follow them all until they give up. I can't do this. But if you can cut your philosophical criteria or behavioral criteria, whatever you want to call it, down to 2 or 3 items and show how they're interrelated with each other, that interrelationship can become more and more complex. But if that's one reason I phrased everything as I did in the student handbook, is because if you can keep it relatively simple and show the relationship of one to the other and how they're each dependent upon each other, people can work with that because they see what you're after, and they can see what they should be striving for. And I think one of our, as I said before, and that this is going to end up being another topic, is, do we take anyone in the dojo, or are we selective, and are there any, is this a subjective thing, or is it, are there common criteria that we all use, even though we don't know that we're all using common criteria? I've had students where they walk in the door and we talk for a bit, and even though they've signed up and paid with the city already, I'll say, I'm sorry, because they're coming in with such a, particularly if they're an adult, kids you can, and this is a nice thing of work. Kids, young kids you can work with, they're easier to mold. Adults is a challenge because they have a lot of life experiences, good and bad, and that affects how they behave and interpret and run their life, good or bad. And I've had to say to some adults, sorry, you can't be in our program, or you can't be in our program any longer, because you're just not, you're violating the safety rules, or you're endangering others, things of this sort. I mean, that's happened probably in 57 years, maybe 4 or 5 times tops. Most people are pretty good. But there are a few people who are just a danger to they're a danger to your students, and you don't have the time to work with them to get whatever issue is bugging them out of their system.
Well, thanks to the late president of the AJA, Dave Basil, we now have background checks into criminal behavior on the part of sensei who want to become part of the AJA. And we've amazingly uncovered sexual predators, people who have felony convictions for various other serious crimes. So you prevent them from getting into an organization from the outset. At the dojo level, I don't know if that's feasible to ask an adult to go through a background check, but that's one thing you can do at a really fundamental level. Other things are possible, but to go back to your example of respect, humility, and integrity, George, as the Budoshin 3 qualities, they're very well crafted because they're usable on a practical level. If anyone is behaving really disrespectfully, or is cursing or abusing other members of the dojo, you simply say, is this manifesting respect? Because part of the Budoshin creed involves showing respect to other people, and you're not showing it. So let's talk about this. And if they continue violating that and acting disrespectfully, then that's grounds to eject them or to discipline them. It's that straightforward.
Well,
what we do is we actually monitor. Like, I'll actually, for people who come in and they want to try out, what I'll tell them is, all right, we'll give you 2 weeks to let you figure out, whether or not you want to do this. But I tell them when they come in, at the same time, I'm also deciding whether or not I want to take you as a student. And then what I also do is I talk with my upper ranks, the guys that have been there the longest with me, and I say, what do you think about this person that's coming into the class? So therefore, the people that have been there the longest, who have trained me the longest, have put their time in, also get a right to make a decision whether or not I want this person as my classmate. And then I'll also question a person that's coming into my school and say, well, did you train somewhere else? If they say, yeah, I train, such and such up the road here, I'll contact that sensei and say, this guy trained with you over here. Do you have any issues with him? And I've actually was blessed enough one time that a gentleman came in, and I could tell by his attitude, I didn't really like his attitude. And he said that he just got kicked out from the other dojo. Well, I wanted to call the other dojo and find out. And it turned out that he was making sexual advances on like 14-year-old girls. So I was like, nope. And I was really happy. And from that point on, I've made it a note that if anybody new comes in, I want to find out, well, are you a first-time martial artist, or do you have experience, and what dojo did you train at? So then I contact those dojos and I want to find out about that student before I ever take them. Yeah. And like you said, if after a while, like you said, Professor Kirby, or if he doesn't work out, if somebody doesn't work out, I have no problem telling them there's the door, regardless of it's a paycheck or not.
Right. I found many times that there are times when I would like to do a lot more with my new students than I do, but I've also found that one of the things you learn in any martial art is patience.
Absolutely.
You're not going to get anywhere if you don't have patience. And I found what happens with some of the sometimes questionable people is that they are very impatient to learn, some secret skills or how they can be a better fighter or what, they're not willing to do the groundwork. They're not willing to set the foundation for what they need to be a successful student in your class. And that's why we have, Usually, if people are going to drop out of my program, they'll do it usually within the first 2 or 3 weeks. If they stick through a whole session, which is 9 to 12 weeks with the city parks department, the odds of them coming back are really pretty good.
Yeah.
It's, it's because they realize that this is something I want to learn, something I want to gain. It's part physical, it's part attitudinal. The sensei likes me, or the sensei is totally ignoring me, or
Right.
all these quote unquote subjective factors come into play, and it's amazing how many times subjective factors determine how a student will act objectively to criteria.
Sensei, one of the things that I've observed through the years, I remember early on studying your respect, humility, and integrity paragraphs in the student handbook. They, as much as they are clarified individually, that they are very interdependent. You really can't have one without having the other two.
Right.
Which is a beautiful thing to realize. So studying them and clarifying them independently is one thing, and realizing that they are very, very interconnected. And if you had to pick one of the three, you'd be hard pressed. Perhaps respect would be at the top of the list. But that's
100%.
Yeah. So anyways, just a little something, a little aside worth mentioning.
Well, and I think when you guys, the topic, I believe, but when we walked in, it was what's the criteria for after showdown, for upper ranks, and for me, I look at two things. Number one, how good of a martial artist is, how much martial arts technique does a person actually know at this rank? How much time have they put on the mats? And then I look at too, if I was to say these guys down the road and I wanted to say, hey, such and such, I want you to go over here and branch off and open up this section of my school over here. What I feel like I can check on him every once in a while. I can see, but I know he's got my back. I know he's going to do good for my, for my business, do good for the style that I represent, all those things. To me, that's criteria for a development in rank. We're not allowed in Kyushin-ryu or integrity, combative defensive arts, from Sensei Torres. We're not allowed to, even now, you cannot promote to your next belt unless you've put at least 4 years under your time under that belt, and you have to be doing something actively, whether you're teaching or you're studying something else. You're educating your brain, you're continuing to learn more, you're still know what it's like to be humble and a student. And you're not going in with this mentality that I'm better than everyone that walks in the door. I tell my students all the time, I just know more than you. That's the only difference between us. We're still same. We're still same people. Now if they're kids, different story. There's a lot of more respect and stuff that's given. But, my guys who train with me that are my peers or older than me, I don't expect them to call me sensei, but they will out of respect. But I know that if I was to move back home, let's say move back to Texas, and I wanted these guys to continue to teach here, I trust them to know that they're going to do so. And to me, I think that's important for, Shodan, well, Nidan on up, even Shodan, of course, but for those ranks that are not just given, like still should be earned, but earned in different ways,
Okay. Let me throw something in here, because I've been compiling a list as we've been talking. This has been an interesting discussion. And I've come up with some criteria for black belt that I've gleaned from all of this. Okay. Well, one, there's technical proficiency, the maturity of the person, emotional maturity.
Agreed.
Are they kind of following the philosophical standard of your art? Do they have a code of conduct, behavior? Are they setting a positive, humble example to others? And are they being respectable, whether it be to you, the sensei, or to other students? Um, and this is what I have so far. And most of these are really subjective.
And the elephant in the room here, just as we're finishing the Olympics, I'm not sure if any of you watched a lot of them, and
As little as possible. It's
and also
horrible.
starting
Embarrassing.
sports season, like football season beginning, and I think of how sports are so much a part of American culture. Everything we've been discussing for the last 10 minutes about instilling ethical qualities, behaving correctly, etiquette, all this stuff is totally totally outside the realm of American sports. Maybe not every one of them, but it's so much more often the case that especially football, basketball, and sometimes baseball players and mixed martial artists, the goal is just to keep them out of jail or prevent them from being arrested for the 5th time. And the ethical side of sports heroes is totally devoid, is totally distinguishable from their excellence at doing what they do athletically. And that's kind of pathetic, in my view. What elevates martial arts is everything we've been talking about, that you can't excel in our martial art or be promoted unless you have these qualities. It's all part of one set of qualities molding a sort of person that we're looking for. It's not just you're excellent at this physical activity and that excuses everything else. That's gigantic to me, and that's part of the status that a martial arts ought to have in the United States, is something more than just he's really good at throwing a ball a certain number of yards or whatever. And I don't know that we emphasize that enough as martial art proponents of martial arts. That should be the value you add, the whole person developing. I'll get off my soapbox now about this, but
That's okay.
I think
That's
I
okay,
think we've
Tom.
all
It just
met
collapsed
people-
anyways.
I think we've all met people, I'm sure in down the line, I've met plenty of martial artists where I wonder, how did you get promoted? And it's not even so much about the arrogance. It's overwhelming. And you're just like, wow, it's like, I can just, feel your arrogance just being around you. And it's like, and you're really not that good. It's like, but why are you so arrogant, about it? There's got to be that, like back to the whole warrior poet society. I mean, I'm also, a member of the Order of Men. All these establishment of organizations are all about men being men, which first of all is being humble and being respectful and all those other things, have a good integrity, but also, having enough education or enough intelligence to know the difference between your students or anyone you would bring in as special guest teachers, instructors, all of that, because you could easily, well, let's be honest, like me and Tom have had this discussion. Nothing really governs martial artists. We don't have really anything that says, Tom, Dick, and Harry can run down a corner over here and open up a dojo, and no one's going to question their credentials. They're going to draw 25, 30 students in there, and they can just be doing the most biggest dojo crap in the world. You know what I mean? And it happens all the time, because I don't think that the good martial artists sometimes hold these guys accountable for their actions, and let's be honest, mom and dad, even now, those guys, people that I have in my dojo, I've had parents who have no clue what I'm doing. I could tell them 25, 30 times what we do, and they still don't know. It's karate. It's all karate. And that's a fact, right? You can't convince people otherwise. Even my family members. I have family members. Oh, you do karate? Never done karate. So, sure. Yeah. You can't argue with it, But the point is that there's nothing really that governs what goes on. So it is very important for whoever we train in our styles and our systems, there that be that criteria, what's acceptable for your next promotions and your next rank. So like, I believe there needs to be time on a mat. I will say the one thing that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has got over Japanese Jiu-Jitsu and a lot of it is that they require a lot of time on the mats. And I've seen, go ahead.
I really dislike the term Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That was like
I do
marketing
too. I do
scheme,
too, to be honest. But
and I'm a 2-decade long practitioner.
Right.
It's it goes back to Japan. All roads go back to Japan. You
It
know,
does.
the Gracie family was taught by Mitsuyo Maeda, who was a direct student of Jigoro Kano. You know,
Right.
and really, it's they're judoka who have specialized in newaza.
Right.
You
That's
know,
exactly right.
and then and um the early expressions of the art, they had a lot of self-defense that I challenge you to look at and not call it Japanese jiu-jitsu.
Right.
You know, um, the biggest difference I see in their self-defense applications, the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu versus Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, is there's not a lot of Tewaza or Tekubi Waza on the Gracie
Right.
side of it. But you know, you're looking at front headlock escapes, standing choke escapes, side headlock escapes, waist grab escapes, and I've seen the self-defense applications in a lot of other forms of Japanese jiu-jitsu. You know, um,
Very strong emphasis on newaza. It's you could say a similar path might have been followed in the development of judo, where you wanted to get rid of the more deadly, immediately debilitating qualities of jujitsu and turn it into a sport. And that's all fine as long as everyone knows what is going on, what the limitations of BJJ or what the limitations of judo are. It just takes that understanding, and that's all fine. But you have to understand that the point is it's trying to be developed as a sport with a certain set of goals that goes along with that.
100%. I mean, we do, you know, on the whole jujitsu aspect, I grew up doing judo ground, you know, judo stand, and then to the ground, we went into newaza. We always worked tactic. But even from the things that I've learned, you know, I'm a Kali guy. I'm a Pikiti Tersha Kali guy. And so you put a training knife in the hands and you're down on the ground, things change real fast, you know, and I've told these guys all the time, being on your back, you know, which is very common, you know, in a guard, is a very bad place to be when you're in a combat situation. You want to be up on your feet as fast as possible. Flip
right,
the
but
guy
that
over, get on
wasn't the
top of him,
original.
great. But don't be the one on the bottom because you're not going to win.
That wasn't the original strategy.
No.
The original strategy was get on top, stay on top, and if you happen to be on your back, you need to be very dangerous there. But people, because it's a sport, have fallen in love with the guard, and you see these specialty guards that you wouldn't utilize if they just did a little striking training on the ground.
Right.
You know, there's like I like half guard, but we put the gloves on every Friday. I don't
Yeah.
use half guard when they're allowed to punch me in the face.
Right.
And if I'm using my guard, it's because I failed to get the takedown. You know, and another thing, it's like if we're talking about sport expressions of the art, they should be viewed under the lens of a duel. This is a duel between two competent martial artists who have agreed upon a certain set of rules. You know,
Yes. Agreed.
and the point of a rondori session should be skill development. If I want to get better at tachiwaza and my throwing techniques, I go into a judo contest. If I want to get better at my dominant control on the ground, I'll do a grappling contest. You know, if I want to get better at a temiwaza, I'll do a karate kumite.
Right.
You know, it's I'm sorry, and I've spoken a lot this meeting. I'm going to be quiet and let you guys talk. I just get excited about this stuff. I'm very passionate.
Keep going, Briston. We're enjoying it.
Must now have
No,
like
we certainly have done a wide range here, and we're still on the first topic, which is all black belts are not created equal. And we've hit a lot of areas, both objective and subjective. I see if there's anything else that's come up here. So I've got more notes down than I normally take in 2 or 3 sessions, which is good. So it's a compliment to all of you guys. Um,
To jump in, George, I have to run. Thank you, everyone. It's great to see Briston and Eric.
yes.
Great to have some
Yeah,
new.
thanks, Tom. I mean, I've been meaning to join one of these for a long time, but just I normally am teaching until right around 10 o'clock. And then so, I can't never join the prior ones that were at 10. So yeah, I'm glad you invited me. Thanks.
Every 2 weeks.
It's every first and third Saturday, ideally, of every month.
Okay.
So
Is that at 11 o'clock now? That's when the meeting starts?
it'll be 8 o'clock Pacific time, and at someone else's request, I've said it would be 1.5 hours to 2 hours maximum, because some people they want to have a schedule, and sometimes we've gone over 2 hours, which everybody is more or less chomping at the bit by then, unless we have a really exciting topic. So, I think at this point, out of sanity, we've spent an hour and 22 minutes so far on one topic, and I think that it's a good video. So I don't want to go in and add another topic here, because we're losing some good people at this point as well. And but there's a lot here. And like I said, I've picked up 4 or 5 additional topics for future discussions. Which, to me, anytime you have a meeting of people and they come up with good questions, that was a good meeting. I mean, you don't have to have answers for all of them. So in any case, so I think what we're going to do is stop at this point. And we recorded the entire meeting, and Kirby did not screw up. And so I should be able to come up with a decent video, hopefully within a couple of days ago, that will be on the YouTube, as they all are. And I want to thank you for being so forthright. That's one of the things I really like about doing this, is that I know when I was a school teacher, it took me a while for the kids to open up, until they realized I wasn't going to say you're wrong, or you can't use that word, or all the other how do you say, students and people are respectable if you treat them with respect. And I've always said, I've run into some teachers, in some sense, they will say, you have to respect me before I respect you. And somehow I think they missed the boat. They didn't even get up the dock.
It works top down.
Yeah, it works in the top. You have to show respect if you want respect. And Briston, who's Taisho?
It's my son Thorin. He's a gray belt in jujitsu.
Great.
He's a jujitsu champion.
Good. Do you know what Taisho means?
No, sensei.
Seki used this for the smallest, lowest ranked student in the class. Taisho is it's an affectionate term, Taisho. It's an affectionate term that literally translates into tough guy. So
he is a tough guy.
and I still do that with my students. As the smallest, lowest ranked student is known as Taisho. And the upper belts will pick up on that right away, and they'll refer to him as Taisho. And it's an affectionate term, so it's a positive thing. So and the kid kind of appreciates it too, because it makes him feel special. So anyway, take good care of your dad, Taisho. Okay.
The next call. This was a great group today.
Yeah, so I want to thank all of you. It was good seeing some of you back on the screen, and we have our next meeting the first Saturday in September at 8 or 11 o'clock, as Eric says, and I hope to see all of you back with us. And now, anyway, so I think that's about it. Unless anyone had,
Thanks, everybody.
if you have any additional topics or any questions you have that we didn't cover, please send me an email, because I know some of my topics are exciting as an old piece of spaghetti that's stuck on the wall, for lack of a better phrase. And so if you have something that's on your mind, let me know. No topic is unacceptable. Anyway, so
Hi.
have a good weekend.
Thanks,
Evan.
guys.
Take care, everybody.
Nice meeting you guys.
Don't
Take care of yourself.
dangerous. Take care.
Bye, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Sensei.